Hi guys, and welcome back to Drukhari 101. Today we are doing a character lab. I'm going to take you through some of my favourite Drukhari builds for your HQ choices. I think there's a lot of different options you can make with the combination of relics and warlord traits available to Drukhari, and it's really fun to try out different types of Archon, different types of Succubi, and different types of Homunculus. So I'm going to take you through 3 of my favourite builds for each one today to give you some ideas about what you as a Drukhari player can do. Without further ado, we're going to start with the big bads of the Drukhari, the Archons themselves. So, Archons. Archons can be tooled up in a number of different ways. They are overwhelmingly most popular as a sort of support character, and the 2 builds I'm going to show you here are definitely support builds, but you can also have a lot of fun with a very melee-centric Archon as well, should you wish. So, my favourite, the Party Archon. This is an Archon that is tooled up for melee combat above all else. You give him the Djinn Blade, which is a relic husk blade, which gives him an extra 2 attacks, flat 3 damage, lots of AP. There is a risk he takes a mortal wound after he uses it, but that's not too bad. And you then couple that with maybe a blast pistol, but also the Splinter Genius upgrade, which gives him a once per game fight again at the end of the fight phase if he's in engagement range, and Hatred Eternal. Now this is Drazar's warlord trait, but it works really well on an upgraded Archon because it gives him full rerolls to hit and to wound. So suddenly with this 7 or 14 attacks once per game, you're coming in at 2s rerolling and then wounding most things on 4s or 3s, but bigger targets on 5s, with rerolls with the Djinn Blade, which generally helps the Archon to threaten almost anything. He can definitely put quite a bit of damage on hard targets, and he will absolutely power through elite infantry and enemy characters if he gets into combat with them as well. It's not subtle, but it's extremely effective and definitely my favourite. Now, perhaps the most popular Archon build at the moment is what I would term a sneaky Archon. This is an Archon who has the Ancient Evil Warlord trait and doesn't generally need to have other melee upgrades to be effective. You might give them a Venom Blade and Splinter Pistol to keep them nice and cheap. What Ancient Evil does is make something he's in engagement range with fight last in the fight phase. Really, really powerful if he then skulks around with big units of monsters, Talos or Grotesques, enemy or Drukhari characters like Drazar or a Succubi, to make sure that those units get to fight before the enemy does. He's a sort of support character in this build, and you could give him one of the support relics, my personal favourite being the Animus Vitae. This is a relic grenade that when you throw it, if you hit, it does D3 mortal wounds, and it also moves power from pain along 1 round. So suddenly you can turn on advance and charge in turn 1 if the enemy's got too close to you, or you can turn on that +1 to hit in combat in turn 2, which is a very nice use for it as well. So that's a nice relic for him and sort of leans into his supporting role. And the Sneaky Archon is a staple in lots of competitive Drukhari lists and definitely a really effective tool in your arsenal. Being able to fight in a couple of places before the enemy can interrupt is extremely useful. The final kind of Archon that I recommend is an old classic. In 8th edition this was very popular, and it uses the combination of the Black Heart relic and warlord trait. Now this is Labyrinthine Cunning, which is a way of getting command points on 6s when command points are spent, and the Writ of the Living Muse, which is a relic that gives the Archon reroll 1s to wound for core units around him. This works really nicely in a real space raid where those core rerolls are going to go on your Coven and your Witch Cult units as well. And being able to regenerate command points for our army, which obviously have an endless array of really good stratagems, can be really nice as well. So the Living Muse, Labyrinthine Cunning, Black Heart Archon is definitely a really nice one to use in an army as a support piece as well. That's Archons. We'll be back in a moment to discuss Succubi. So, Succubi. As a general rule, the one thing I would say about Succubi is that you have a few warlord traits out there and relics out there that are geared at making them tougher or harder to kill, and I would say that that's almost entirely pointless. Succubi, if something gets to fight at them that's dangerous, they'll probably die. But what you really want to be doing is enhancing their ability to do damage and to cause the enemy trouble in the fight phase. So all 3 builds that I've looked at do that, but they do that in slightly different ways. So the first and most common are the Cult of Strife Succubus builds. You'll see Succubi that are tooled up with either the Competitive Edge Warlord trait from the Book of Rust or the Precision Blows Warlord trait from the main book. And they'll often be comboed with the Triptych Whip, which is a whip that gives you a load more attacks, damage 2, lots of AP, wounding on 2s as a poison weapon. So really, really good into big monsters and enemy characters and enemy infantry. And with potent metallotoxins, the Stratagem, you can also threaten vehicles, and I do this quite a lot with mine as well. Precision Blows as a Warlord trait is going to give you 6s to hit, doing mortal wounds equivalent to the damage of the weapon. So on the Triptych Whip, you're going to be doing 2 mortal wounds every time, and you can have her with about 10 attacks with other buffs as well. So it's extremely potent on that. Competitive Edge is nice because what it does is every attack you've made that doesn't get through to the inflict damage stage, once you've finished your attacks, you can then make another round of attacks with all of those attacks that didn't get through. So if you manage to do 4 actual wounds that actually do damage to the opponent with your sort of 9-10 wounds, 10 attack Succubi, you can then go again and do the remaining 4 or 5 attacks all over again. Really good way of slapping damage onto hard targets, enemies that really, really need to die. Those go very well on the Triptych Whip, as discussed. You can also do this with Razor Flails, which gives a Succubus loads of attacks. Combines quite nicely with Grave Lotus Toxin, the relic, which then increases those Razor Flail attacks by 1 damage as well. So there's various ways using those Strife special relics and traits to really amp up the damage of a Succubus, which demonstrates why Cult of Strife is perhaps the most popular option out there. Another nice one is Cult of Red Grief, and the combination I like is the Bloodglaive paired with Quicksilver Fighter. Quicksilver Fighter gives your Succubus 2 more attacks, and then the Bloodglaive is increasing the strength, flat 3 damage, AP 3 glaive. So extremely good at killing elite targets, putting damage on characters, more likely to be able to harm and damage the enemy if they've got damage reduction, for example, as well, which otherwise shaves off quite a lot of your damage potential. So the Bloodglaive is a really powerful tool in that. And on a Red Grief Succubus, you've got potential options with your stratagems to fight and then get back into transports afterwards as well, which hasn't been utilised much. People haven't used this sort of Red Grief capacity all that much, but I think it has a lot of play. Finally, we have the best one, the most ridiculous one. We have the I'm Taking You With Me Succubus. This is a Cursed Blade Succubus. This is where you upgrade them with the Warlord trait Treacherous Deceiver, but you also give them the relic Traitor's Embrace. And what this means is, when your Succubus is in combat, making 4-ups on her invuln bounces mortal wounds back on the opponent. And when she's killed, on a 2-up, the relic does D3 plus 3 mortal wounds to whatever she was fighting. This is really nice if you want to send your Succubus into a more expensive enemy character and take them with you. It's sort of a suicide kamikaze Succubus who goes in, gets destroyed by whatever she's fighting, but then does an enormous amount of mortal wounds on the way out and can take do more damage and take something with her that's more valuable than herself. You have to use this one carefully, and the 2-up on Traitor's Embrace does mean that sometimes you're let down, and it's perhaps more of a gimmicky build, but it is extremely fun when someone's sort of chapter master or something like that kills your Succubus only to explode into flames themselves. So that's Succubi, guys. I think there's a good range of options there. I'll be back in a moment to talk Homunculi. So, the Homunculi. Now, in general, these are better suited to support roles than active melee roles like the Succubus. I've put a melee Succubus in here just for fun, but I think generally you're going to find that the supporting and regenerative traits on the Homunculus are much more effective. So, my first favourite is what we call Mr. Never Die. Okay, this is an upgraded Homunculus, so you upgrade him to gain the ability to come back to life on D3 wounds on a 2-up the first time he dies. You pair this with the Nightmare Doll, which is a relic which gives him a 4-up Feel No Pain, and then you can obviously, depending on the overall trait you put on him, you could also have him minusing damage by 1 as well. And then the good combination to go on Mr. Never Die is either the ability to heal flat 3 when you're healing your monsters, which I believe is Master Regenerist, Warlord trait, Or you can go with Twisted Animator, which is my current favourite, which allows you in the command phase to bring back D3 racks to a unit, including a Homunculus unit, which can have some nice objective play. It can keep OBSEC troops and bodies on key objectives at the right times if your opponent hasn't managed to kill off a Rax unit. And it generally makes him an extremely irritating piece that your opponent desperately wants to deal with but struggles to. The melee Homunculus, I think this is quite fun. You take a Coven of 12 Homunculus and you give him the Flensing Blade, which is a dangerous weapon that does flat 3 damage against characters, suddenly makes him actually quite dangerous in melee combat. And you can put Master Nemesine on him as well to give him rerolls. And this, coupled with the Coven of 12 stratagem, which allows you to do D3 mortal wounds to something you're in combat with the Homunculus, can enable him to assassinate characters with quite effective combinations of weapons and stratagems there. Finally, we have the Dark Creed Homunculus, what Scary has termed the Oogity Boogity Homunculus. This uses the Fear Incarnate Warlord trait, which is where you roll against someone's leadership and you can potentially switch off OBSEC on that unit and make them unable to do actions. Coupled with the other leadership shenanigans that Dark Creed can do, and things like Grisly Trophies that also reduce leadership, this can be really nasty and potentially really annoying as well. The Homunculus is another great candidate for carrying the Animus Vitae, so that one can work really well. But the other thing I like to give him is the relic that you can give the upgraded Homunculus, which is known as the Poisonous Ampule. With the Poisonous Ampule, at the end of your movement phase, you pick something within 9. On a 2-up, it takes D3 mortals, but you also shut off its auras for the turn, or you shut off the auras it's receiving. This can be absolutely clutch in games because you have the ability to turn off something like Rites of War, which might be giving your opponent OBSEC that they need to battle you for objectives. You could turn off an Apothecary's Feel No Pain, various different applications, things like the Foul Blight Spawn with their No Charge aura. These kinds of clutch units that your opponent's list will often rely on. The Poisonous Ampule has the ability to, for one turn only, completely shut that off. And often with your sort of overwhelming melee force, one turn is all you need. So yeah, I highly recommend the upgraded Homunculus. Experiment with those different toys and have fun with that as well. So that concludes the character lab for today. Those are the characters I've had the most fun with since the Drukhari book dropped. I'd be very interested to hear other combinations people have come up with, so do let us know in the comments if you enjoyed it, what kinds of builds you yourself have come up with. Particularly interesting, are there any other kinds of Archon out there? Any other kinds of builds for the Archon characters leading into this particular sub-factions? I'd be interested to know. Anyway, happy hunting out there, guys. It's still a very good time to be a Drukhari player, and I will see you soon.